In the earliest days of the outbreak, before panic truly took hold, the Iran government clung to the hope that the strange illness sweeping through the streets was nothing more than a particularly aggressive strain of the flu. To reassure its citizens, they commissioned a health advisory poster from the global relief effort, which was promptly featured on the Iran city website. It offers simple remedies, rest, hydration, and over-the-counter medication. No one could have known that these measures would soon be useless. But the symptoms worsened, cases surged. As confusion gave way to alarm, the international medical community convened an emergency congress in Iran. Among the experts invited was the GRE. Chosen for their prior experience with viral epidemics, they arrived armed with knowledge, but unprepared for what they would discover. Dr. Jonathan Bartow, a senior GRE virologist, led early investigations. His team concluded that the virus likely entered Iran through the contaminated food, not the air or water. Curiously, the man believed to be patient zero showed no signs of spreading infection before his death, casting doubt on more conventional transmission theories. Yet as fear spread faster than the disease, trust in the GRE began to erode. Whispers circulated that the organization wasn't just responding to the outbreak, they had somehow caused it. Some accused of engineering the virus, others believed they were merely cleaning up a disaster they helped unleash. In Iran, truth was a scarce commodity, and the lines between savior and suspect were rapidly blurring. A few weeks into the nightmare, when the Iran virus had taken firm root and panic was giving way to desperation, the Iran stadium was transformed into a sprawling field hospital. Ambulances lined the perimeter like sentinels, and inside, rows of the infected laid under flickering lights, their moans echoing through the halls. It was here that the GRE began administering a prototype medication, one they believed could hold the virus at bay. The drug would later be known as Antizin. But the virus was relentless. New hotspots ignited across the city like wildfire. Infections surged through neighborhoods, and the Ministry of Defense had no choice but to take drastic measures. The Old Town district, one of Iran's oldest and most densely populated regions, was sealed off, placed under strict quarantine. The operation was swift, a joint effort between the GRE and military forces. Armed checkpoints were erected, roads were blocked, and the city was cut in two. As civilians were evacuated, only the sick and the doctors, and a dwindling number of volunteers remained behind. The GRE, refusing to abandon their research, established a laboratory deep within Old Town. In time, that lab will evolve into something far more ambitious, the Forever Foundation, a name that masked its origins and desperation and disease. Inside its walls, the line between salvation and sacrifice would blur forever. When the military assumed control over the chaos in Iran, it did so under the iron command of General Qadir Soleiman. Backed by the global relief effort, the army was granted sweeping authority to enforce emergency directives. Checkpoints appeared overnight. Drones hovered overhead. The city, already suffocating under the weight of infection, was now shackled by curfew, one enforced with the threat of imprisonment, or worse, for even the smallest sign of disobedience. At first, Solomon played the role of protector, but when the GRE failed to evacuate his younger brother, his only family left, something inside him shattered. What had once been a man of order became something colder, something dangerous. Blinded by grief, he twisted his power into a weapon, using it to intimidate and silence. The very scientists he had sworn to safeguard became casualties of his fury. He abandoned them when they needed him most. As the infection surged beyond containment and Iran began to rot from within, the GRE shifted tactics. While the military lobbied for eradication, an airstrike that would wipe out the city from the map, the GRE chose a slower, quieter fight. They sent Antizin airdrop to isolated survivors, prolonging hope one crate at a time. They launched the GRE support television broadcast. Somber voices echoed through the darkened living rooms with updates and instructions in cold comfort. But it wasn't enough. Eventually, the inevitable decision was made. All exits were sealed. The towering quarantine wall became Iran's tombstone, cutting the city off from the outside world. There would be no more rescues, no more escapes. Iran was no longer just a city under siege. It was a city sentenced to isolation, its fate abandoned to the infected and those desperate few still fighting to survive. In the early days of the Haran outbreak, when fear still outweighed understanding, the race for the cure began almost immediately. Within the weeks of the epidemic being declared, a prototype of a drug that would be known as Antizin was already being administered to patients at the makeshift field hospitals inside Haran Stadium. The GRE worked around the clock, and despite the chaos unfolding across the city, the development of the antiviral was already approaching its final stages. But time was a luxury Haran no longer had. When Old Town was sealed off under strict quarantine, the GRE made a bold decision. They established a research lab within the heart of the danger, inside the Forever Foundation, a facility hidden away behind barricades and guarded gates. It was there, surrounded by the sick and dying, that the final trials Antizin would take place. Every dose delivered, every life saved, or lost, became another data point in GRE's desperate bid to halt the virus before it slipped past Haran's crumbling borders. With Antizin showing promising results in the early lab trials, the next step for the GRE was clear, but morally complex. They needed human test subjects. To secure volunteers, the Ministry of Defense launched an aggressive campaign, but financial compensation, prioritized medical care, and the promise of helping humanity fight back against the virus. Sign-ups were handled through the Global Relief Efforts website, and the thousands desperate for hope or simply survival began to register. By the time Antizin reached full development, Haran was already unraveling. The city had fallen into a spiral of violence, fear, and infection. Streets once bustling with life now echoed with screams and the sounds of distant gunfire. Amid the turmoil, the GRE moved quickly, partnering with pharmaceutical manufacturers to mass-produce Antizin and distribute it widely as possible. From that moment forward, airdrops no longer carried just food supplies, they carried lifelines. Each crate contained vials of Antizin, along with detailed instructions on how to administer the drug safely. The earlier desperate recommendation to amputate infected limbs was formally withdrawn. It was finally a more effective answer. Still, the GRE issued stern warnings. More wasn't better. Overuse of Antizin did nothing to increase its effectiveness. The key was consistency and control. Their support broadcasts echoed through Haran, calm voices instructing the frightened and isolated to follow the prescribed dosage exactly. Antizin wouldn't cure the virus, but it would buy time. And in a city running out of it, time was the most valuable thing left. As the world turned its back on the doomed city Haran, the global relief effort was not yet finished with it. Somewhere behind the quarantine wall, a man named Kadir Solomon, once a military commander, now a rogue operative, built something the GRE considered dangerous, a stolen file. Within it, they claimed, was highly sensitive data. Preliminary research on the cure, along with a complete structural breakdown of the virus itself. In the wrong hands, they warned, such knowledge could incite panic or be weaponized. To recover it, the GRE dispatched one of its most capable operatives, Kyle Crane. His mission was clear: infiltrate Haran, track down Solomon, and retrieve the file before it could be leaked to the world. The GRE insisted it was a matter of global safety. The data, they claimed, was incomplete, unstable. Releasing it prematurely could, in their words, prove more toxic than the virus itself. To tighten their grip, the GRE enacted a citywide communication blackout. No signals in or out, no calls for help, no leaks. Haran, already a prison of infection, became a fortress of silence. And into that silence, Kyle Crane descended, unaware of what he would find in Haran that would change everything he thought he knew about the virus, the GRE, and himself. Shortly after entering Haran, Kyle Crane's mission took an unexpected turn. He was bitten. With the virus now inside him, time became his enemy. Desperate for answers, he sought help and found it in Dr. Imran Zeri, quiet but brilliant scientist working tirelessly on his own version of the cure. Zeri's work was raw, unrefined, but promising. Crane reported the discovery to his GRE handlers, hoping it might shift their priorities. It didn't. Instead, the GRE added a new directive to Crane's mission: retrieval of the doctor's research. Still, their primary concern remained unchanged: recover the stolen files in Solomon's possession. As Crane continued to send back intel, the GRE began to suspect a harsh truth. The local warlord known as Race might actually be Kadir Solomon himself, operating under a new identity. With this possibility in mind, they devised a brutal strategy. Crane had gained the trust of Harris Brecken, leader of the group of survivors sheltering in a fortified high-rise called the Tower. The group was running dangerously low on Antizin. The GRE gave their order. Crane was to destroy the next Antizin shipment, cut off the Tower's supply to force Brecken into desperation. This, they believed, would compel him to seek help from Reyes, giving Crane the perfect opportunity to approach the warlord as an ambassador. Crane hesitated. He saw the fear in the eyes of the people, heard the coughing of the sick, watched the children cling to fleeting hope. He knew that the Antizin meant to them. He knew what the Antizin meant to them. But the GRE's grip was unrelenting, and his mission, they reminded him, was bigger than one group of survivors. With a heavy heart and shaking hands, Crane destroyed the shipment, and with it, a piece of himself. Crane's alliance with Reyes was always uneasy, a dance of necessity and distrust. He played the part that GRE demanded, working his way into the warlord's inner circle while enduring his cruelty, his games, and his constant need to assert dominance. But eventually the truth came into focus. Reyes was, without a doubt, Kadir Solomon, the man Crane had been sent to stop. When Crane relayed this communication, the tone from the GRE handlers shifted. The organization became colder, more mechanical. They no longer asked about Zeri, the survivors, or even Crane's worsening infection. All attention turned to one thing: the file. The stolen data now consumed the GRE's every directive. Then came the final blow. The GRE communications flatlined. No more Antizin airdrops, no more support. When pressed, they cited political complications. Crane was on his own. Then came word that Reyes had captured Dr. Imran. Driven by desperation and guilt, Crane infiltrated Reyes' stronghold in a bid to rescue the man who had once tried to save him. But the situation had changed, radically. The GRE, it seems, had been pushed aside. Their influence had crumbled, overtaken by the Ministry of Defense, which now called the shots from beyond the quarantine wall. Crane was ambushed to find Zere, captured, beaten, and brought before Reyes. And that's when everything fell apart. The attendant system Crane had prepared, supposedly to restore order, had instead allowed Reyes to prepare for something far more dangerous: a global broadcast. With a twisted sense of triumph, Reyes announced his intention to publish the file, revealing to the world what it truly contained. There was no cure hidden within, no salvation, only plans, cold, calculated plans, to weaponize the Haran virus. The GRE, Reyes sneered, never wanted a cure. They wanted power, leverage, profit. Crane, thinking he was fighting to save lives, had been helping spread the very shadow he hoped to destroy. And in that moment, everything he believed in unraveled. It didn't take long for the file to ignite the world. Once Reyes broadcast the stolen data, it spread like wildfire through international news networks. Analysts and journalists tore through its contents, and implications were damning. Verified as authentic, the file revealed that the GRE had been complicit in a vast, orchestrated conspiracy, one that stretched beyond Haran's walls and into deep corners of the global bioweaponry industry. Overnight, the organization found itself thrust into the center of the worldwide scandal. Protests erupted. Leaders demanded investigations. The public wanted justice. In the middle of the storm stood Kyle Crane. After making his own desperate broadcast to the outside world, pleaded for help, affirming that survivors were still alive. Crane becoming more than just a field agent. He became a symbol. The GRE, sensing an opportunity to salvage their image, reached out to him once more. Their tone had changed. They weren't issuing orders now, they were bargaining. They wanted Dr. Zer's research, the same research they had once ignored, to be delivered directly to them. They painted it as a final act of redemption, but Crane had heard too many lies, seen too many betrayals. He hesitated. Trust had become a rare currency in Haran, and the GRE had long since bankrupted theirs. As Crane assisted Dr. Alan Camden, another scientist working tirelessly on the cure, a new threat emerged. Reyes, the warlord, ever opportunistic, had struck a deal with the GRE behind Crane's back. He offered them the fragments of Zier's research that he managed to steal, in exchange for extraction and freedom. It was a move born of greed, but it placed the entire city at risk. If Reyes succeeded, the Ministry of Defense would no longer hesitate to erase Haran from the map. Time was running out. With the threat of total annihilation looming, Crane was forced into one final pursuit. This time, not to save the research, but to stop the GRE from burying the truth beneath the rubble and fire. Before the city fell, before the infection drowned Haran in blood and sounds, two of the GRE's brightest minds, Dr. Imre Nziri and Dr. Alan Camden, were hired to develop the cure. The pay was generous, the mission clear. Stop the virus before it could spread beyond the city's borders. But when the walls of Haran went up and communication fell apart, so did their partnership. Nziri remained in the slums, setting up a lab in a half-ruined building known as a courtyard. Surrounded by chaos, he worked tirelessly, running experiments on infected tissue and analyzing the effects of Antizin. Through his efforts, a glimmer of hope emerged. Nziri became convinced that a cure wasn't just possible, it was within reach. A breakthrough came when he studied tissue from a bolter, one of the faster, more elusive infected. He discovered that an experimental bait he had left out seemed to alter the infection's behavior, perhaps even slowed it. It was a clue, small but vital, in the puzzle of salvation. Meanwhile, deep in Old Town, Dr. Camden continued to fight from the Forever Foundation's sealed facility. Isolated and under constant threat, he carried on the work that he and Nziri had begun, using every piece of data every sample Crane had smuggled in to push closer to a cure. Separated by miles of infected streets and walls of bureaucracy, Nziri and Camden's efforts laid the foundation for something greater, something after the worst had passed. A coalition of virologists, researchers, and survivors, many of whom had once worked alongside the GRE, they completed the task that had seemed impossible in the early days. Through their combined knowledge and sacrifices of those who risked everything to bring it to light, they've developed a vaccine. At last, humanity was pulled back from the edge. The Haran virus would not become a global plague. What began as a city's slow death became, in the end, a testament to resilience, science, and the few who chose to fight when it had been easier to flee. The world exhaled a breath of relief when the Haran vaccine was announced. It marked the end of the nightmare, a promise that the horrors of the infection would never breach the walls of that doomed city. Global relief effort under intense scrutiny assured the public that all further experimentation on the virus had ceased. Their laboratories were decommissioned. Their mission, they claimed, was over. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more sinister. In hidden facilities scattered across the globe, the GRE quietly continued its research. While the world believed they had moved on, they were instead perfecting the very threat they had once vowed to destroy. Deep within a covert lab near Geneva, scientists were working on a new variant of the Haran virus. Their goal was no longer a cure, but control, weaponization, and profit. This new strain, refined in secrecy and bred for aggression, would become to known as Tachi Transmissive Haran Virus, or THV, faster, deadlier, unstoppable. Some reports suggest the project had begun as early as 2015, a mere year after the original outbreak. The GRE, unwilling to let go of their ambitions, partnered with the pharmaceutical giant Vitamin, a shadow conglomerate with deep ties to the military-industrial complex. Together, they pursued what they called a definitive edge in biological warfare. But ambition breeds carelessness. Whether it was negligence, deliberate sabotage, or simple human error, the virus escaped. From the laboratory in Geneva, the THV slipped into the world. Silent, swift, and devastating, that nightmare that humanity had thought had ended in Haran was only beginning. And once again, the price of secrecy would be paid in blood. It began quietly, just a pair of strange cases in Zurich and Paris, both reported on October 20th, 2021. But within days, hospitals were overwhelmed, streets emptied, borders tightened. The world, still recovering from the horrors of Haran, once again was on the brink. This was not the same virus, however. The new strain, the THV, spread with terrifying speed. Unlike its predecessor, it didn't wait for victims to die to turn them. It left from host to host in hours, not days, leaving health systems paralyzed and governments scrambling. Dr. Kobayashi Katsumi, head of research at the GRE, and one of the few remaining voices of reason within the organization, sounded the alarm. His recommendations were immediate and severe: close all borders, shut down airports and train lines, and isolate every suspected carrier, quarantine their contacts, burn the dead. But the virus moved faster than the warnings. Behind the scenes, the GRE had already resumed frantic vaccine development, this time enlisting a network of private sector biotech firms, many of which had deep roots in pharmaceutical defense contracts. The race was on, but hope was thinning fast. THV was not just a health crisis, it was a global unraveling, and for those who remembered Haran, the nightmare felt all too familiar. By December 19, 2021, the world was spiraling. What experts had feared became undeniable. The THV was far more contagious than their initial reports had suggested. Cities that had barely registered a case weeks before were now reporting thousands. Panic spread faster than the infection. Yet, in darkness, there were glimmers of resistance. Antizin, the antiviral drug first used during the original Haran outbreak, once again proved to be effective, slowing the progression of symptoms and suppressing viral activity. While unlike before, a new tool emerged in the fight: UV light. Exposure to it could weaken the virus and prevent surface transmission. It didn't purge the virus from the infected, but it gave people a chance, a window to act before it was too late. Even so, it wasn't enough. Dr. Kobayashi, increasingly desperate in his warnings, issued a grim prediction. If left unchecked, THV would infect half the global population within weeks. The GRE, backed by emergency powers, enacted sweeping restrictions across dozens of countries. Businesses not deemed essential were ordered to shut down indefinitely. Social gatherings were outlawed, limited to no more than 4 people from the same household. Free movement was restricted. Curfews returned. Streets emptied. Only first responders, medical personnel, and essential workers were allowed beyond their homes. The world was locking itself down, not to just contain the virus, but to hold on to the last fragile threads of order before it all unraveled. For many, it was deja vu. For others, it was the first taste of what Haran had endured. But now, the virus was no longer confined. Now, the world was Haran. By January 24th, 2023, hope was wearing thin. The GRE's latest report confirmed what many had feared but refused to say out loud. The pandemic was accelerating. Infection rates were surging across continents, and the mortality rate had climbed with it. Entire regions had gone dark, their populations either consumed by THV or lost to civil collapse. Hospitals were graveyards. Cities were tombs. Faced with global devastation, the GRE made a fateful decision. No longer able to operate from the shadows, they embedded themselves at the epicenter of the crisis, abandoning their remote control in favor of a direct, radical intervention. They began working on the ground, desperate, ruthless, and focused only on containing what remained. By 2024, the world had changed beyond recognition. Only one city remained: Villedor. Somehow, whether through sheer luck or early containment, it had survived the wave that had consumed the rest of the globe. The city became a final stronghold, a flickering beacon in the darkness of the post-THV world. And once again, the GRE returned to their familiar pattern: research, control, secrecy. They established laboratories inside Villedor's walls, continuing the study of their virus under the so-called controlled conditions. With the world outside gone, their work had become both salvation and sentence. In Villedor, humanity clung to its last fragile hope, and the GRE clung to its last dangerous secret. By the time Aidan Caldwell set foot in Villedor, the city had become a fractured remnant of humanity's last stand, and the GRE, once a global titan of science and control, was all but a ghost. The laboratories, once sterile fortresses of research and restraint, now stood silent, gutted, and crawling with the infected. Doors sealed for years had been torn open by desperate hands or clawed apart by monsters they helped create. Whether the fall was confined to Villedor's GRE branches or represented the collapse of the entire organization remained unclear. No broadcasts, no orders, no reinforcements, only static. Of the once sprawling medical presence, only 2 former GRE doctors remained. Vincent Waltz, the man whose cruel experiments had forever altered Aidan's body and life, was alive and working in the shadows. His obsession with control and transformation had not ended with the outbreak. For him, the fall of the GRE was simply a step in a longer, darker journey. The other, Veronica Ryan, had chosen a different path. She now serves the survivors of Bazaar as a medic and advisor. Quiet, dedicated, and carrying the weight of a past she seldom speaks of. In a city teetering on the edge of ruin, she became one of the few who still tried to heal, not control. But whispers remained. Notes scrawled on old terminals. Rumors traded in low voices. Suggestions that somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the reach of the virus, the GRE still endured. Some believed they were regrouping, drafting a new plan. one that could either restore the world or bury it forever. In Villedor, the infection still burned, but it was not just a virus that haunted its streets. It was the shadow of those who created it. And the question that now loomed wasn't just whether the GRE was gone. It was whether they really ever truly stopped.